All right. So welcome everybody to Parsha Unpacked. This week is the Parsha of Chayei Sarah. Beautiful, very special Parsha. Sadly, this year, unlike usual years, this year will be a little bit different. Normally on this particular Parsha, in Israel, the city of Hebron, is packed with tens of thousands of people making a pilgrimage to the tomb of Sarah, the matriarch, the great matriarch, and the tomb of the patriarchs. This year, I think it's been actually, I'm assuming it's been canceled, but it has to have been canceled for this year. So hopefully next year. But I want to just start off by pointing out a few dedications. We have more than one dedication for tonight. So first of all, tonight's class is co-sponsored by the Gottliebs and the Futtermans. So Susie and Larry are sponsoring in memory of Susie's mother, Zlata Bas Moshe, on her 8th yahrzeit. May she have an Aliyas Haneshama, and may she have nachas from Susie and Larry. Oops, wait, go back. From Susie and Larry, and from your kids and your grandkids and all of the wonderful things that you're doing. And co-sponsored by Bob and Sue Gottlieb, in memory of Bob's father, it's Robert Newton Ben Frederick Morse, who is his yahrzeit. It's his 11th yahrzeit, and that's actually tonight. So he should also have an Aliyas Neshama and much, much nachas from you guys and from your children, your grandchildren, and all of the mitzvahs, and in the merit of sponsoring this class, they should both have an Aliyas and a Shama. And
Amen.
Special Mazel Tov in honor of the bat mitzvah of Susie and Larry's granddaughter, Naomi Leah. So Mazel Tov to you guys.
Mazel Tov.
Also tremendous nachas.
Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov.
Okay. I also want to just say, on a personal note, we want to also dedicate class tonight to the memory of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. I'm sure everybody knows by now of the terrible, tragic, sudden passing of Rabbi Sachs, who was 72. And as I said in the tribute, I'm not going to go through it again, but it's a tremendous, tremendous loss for the Jewish people. And we'll conclude tonight's class with an insight and a teaching from Rabbi Sachs on the Parsha. If you do not follow Rabbi Sachs's Parsha, I strongly encourage you to do it. It's on aish.com. I think Julia puts them up on our website also. And they're really, really very, very spectacular insights. So tonight's class is also dedicated to the memory of Rabbi Sachs. Okay, so we're going to begin the Parsha. And the Parsha begins with the death of Sarah at the age of 127. And immediately after the funeral, the eulogies, we find out that Abraham sets out to purchase a burial plot for his wife Sarah, and not just a burial plot, but the burial plot, the tomb of the patriarchs, what we call Ma'arat HaMachpelah. And I can't see everybody, but show of hands, who's been to Hebron and been to the Ma'arat HaMachpelah? I'm assuming many of you have. For those of you who have not, you're going to have to do something about that. Okay.
I have.
Yes, you have, Steve, but you haven't been inside.
I haven't been inside.
I took Steve there last year. The day we went, it was closed. Yep, you have. Okay, so the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the tomb of the patriarchs, the Parsha starts off with the story of Abraham purchasing the tomb of the patriarchs to bury his wife Sarah. And as we know, this is in the city of Hebron. And just to understand for a moment the significance of that particular place, so in Kabbalistic tradition, we learn that the world was created, the universe is created by God with 4 primary physical elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And the 4 holy cities in Israel, each one of these holy cities correspond to another element that God used in creation. So for example, Jerusalem corresponds to fire. And the reason for that is because one of the main things in Jerusalem was the Mizbeach, the altar, where the fire would consume the daily offerings in the Holy Temple. And Tiberias is water because of the Sea of Galilee. Tzvat represents the element of air because of the ethereal, airy quality of the mysticism that comes from Tzvat. And finally, Hebron represents the earth because of this building and this place where underneath in the earth in this holy place are buried. Not only are Adam and Eve buried there, but Abraham and Sarah are buried there, and Isaac and Rebekah are buried there, as well as Jacob and Leah are buried there. So it's a very, very special holy place. So in Hebron, Abraham begins to make a deal, so to speak, haggling, if you will, with the local Hittite population in order to purchase this plot of land, which he does. This purchase took place in the year 1677 before the Common Era, which is exactly 3,697 years ago. So almost 3,700 years ago, the Jewish people purchased their first piece of land in the Holy Land. Now, it's interesting because Abraham kind of gets ripped off over here. He ends up paying 400 shekels in the hard currency, in the coin, silver coins, and it's a tremendous, exorbitant price. And the question is, why was he so adamant? Why was he so insistent on this particular piece of land? When Ephron the Hittite, who we're going to learn about in a minute, ends up offering him the land for a ridiculous amount of money, why does Abraham not just say, hey, you know what? Thank you, Ephron, but no, thank you. I'll go find somewhere else to bury my beloved wife, Sarah. What is it about this particular place on earth that so attracted Abraham? So the Zohar being the primary source of Kabbalistic teaching, tells us that there's a story, there's a backstory over here. And the story goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, who were expelled from the Garden of Eden. And from the time that Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, so Adam yearned and longed to return back to the Garden of Eden. And he did everything he could within his ability to return back to the Garden of Eden. Ultimately, he discovered that there was one place on earth that was the entrance way to the Garden of Eden, and it was a piece of land. It was an area that you're looking at right now on the screen. The building wasn't there. That building was built by Herod, obviously, many, many years later. But it was the piece of land where the tomb of the patriarchs eventually would stand in the fields of Kiryat Arba. And what did he do? He dug a cave for himself as a burial place for he and his wife. Adam and Eve were buried there because Adam understood that that was the closest place on earth to the Garden of Eden. So fast forward to many, many years later when Abraham is living in Hebron, and we learned in last week's Parsha that he had his bris milah, his circumcision. Then he was visited by the angels in the guise of men who came, and he went and searched for a calf to bring them food. And he was chasing after the calf. The calf got away, and Abraham was chasing after the calf, the Zohar tells us, and he stumbled upon this cave where Abraham and Sarah were buried. And the reason why he knew something was unusual there is because there was a burning candle, a candle that was burning inside this cave, an incredible fragrance, the fragrance of the Garden of Eden he smelled. And then he saw the tombs of Adam and Eve, and he understood the significance of this place. And he decided that this place and only this place was going to be the tomb of the ancestral tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs moving forward. The Zohar tells us something very interesting. The Zohar tells us that the souls of the righteous people, when righteous people die, their neshama, their soul goes into starts the journey of the soul in the tomb of the patriarchs and enters to the front of the cave so that Adam and Eve and the other patriarchs and matriarchs can see their descendants, their righteous descendants, and rejoice in front of Hashem, blessed be He. So there's a very significant meaning to this particular place. Chevron comes from the word in Hebrew chaver, which means friend, but it also means, the reason why chaver means friend is because in Hebrew, lechaber means to connect or to join together. So Chevron is the city of connection because it's the place where Olam Hazeh, this world, and Olam Haba, the world to come, are connected. So right away, Abraham goes to the effort to purchase this piece of land, and he begins a series of negotiations with Ephron. Now, Ephron was not a good dude, and he made it particularly miserable for Abraham. He promised him everything. He delivers almost nothing, which is the exact opposite trait that Abraham displays, because Abraham did the opposite. He promised the angels, come and have a morsel of food, a little bite to eat, and then he brings them an elaborate feast. So Abraham's quality or his trait is to promise very little and to deliver everything. Ephraim was the exact opposite. So he's involved in these terrible, terrible negotiations with Ephron the Hittite. Now, the great Spanish commentator known as Rabbeinu Yonah, who was a cousin of Nachmanides, who wrote many books. The most famous book he wrote is the Chayei, the Gates of Repentance. He has an interesting take over here. He actually says, we know that Abraham and Sarah, we know that they were tested 10 times. We know that because it says so in Ethics of Our Fathers. Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot, does not tell us what those 10 tests were. So it's left up to the commentators, all the commentaries, to determine what was the first test, what was the second test, etc. So most of the commentaries agree that the final test of Abraham was what we learned in the end of last week's Parsha, which was the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. However, some of the commentaries point out that was not the last one. And in fact, Rabbeinu Yonah says that the final test of Abraham was this story right here. And what exactly was the test? The test was, can Abraham, who's in terrible, terrible pain, he just lost his lifelong partner, who he'd been through so many tests and challenges with, Sarai Menu, the holy matriarch Sarah, he had just lost her, and all of a sudden he finds himself involved in these horrible, Middle Eastern Machne Yehuda Shuk type of negotiations with this swindling Ephron. And the whole time that it happens, he stays calm. He remains a mensch. He displays derech eretz, menschlichkeit, kindness, goodness. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't get frustrated. Says the Rabbeinu Yonah, that was actually the final test of Abraham. I like to tell this story. It reminds me of a story. I'm sure you've heard me share this story before, but there was a young couple that had a baby, and they were in Shari Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem, which actually is where my son Levi was born. And they just had this child, and they were very excited. You can imagine how excited they were. It was their first child. And the husband was in the elevator going up to visit his wife in the hospital to see the baby. And in walks the great sage, the great tzaddik, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach died, I think, in the year 1994, I would say, because I remember I was at his funeral. So this must have been a little bit before that, in the late 80s, early 90s. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach walks in to the into the elevator, and he sees this young man in there. And the young man says, "Oh, Rabbi, great news. My wife had a baby. It's our first child." And Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach beams this beautiful smile. I should have put a picture of it. He had this most incredible smile. And he hugs this young man and he says, Mazel tov, you should have so much nachas. And then he got out of the elevator. And then the man goes and he tells his wife, "You're not going to believe who I just saw in the elevator. It's incredible. It was from Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and I told him about the baby, and he wished us a mazel tov." And his wife said to him, do you know why he's here? And she said, no, why is he here? And he said, because his wife just passed away this morning and she's in the hospital. So, here he was in his own pain, his own grief, and his own sorrow, and yet he was able to feel the joy and feel the pain nonetheless. I feel the joy nonetheless of this young man. That's what Avram's 10th and final test was, according to the Rebbeinu Yonah. Could he, despite all the pain and suffering that he was going through from losing his wife, could he maintain his equilibrium and negotiate like a mensch? Okay, now I want to move on. Moving on in the Parsha. So, as you know, I always encourage people to try, if they can, to read the text of the Torah in Hebrew. Now, I know that's not possible for everybody. I know it's challenging, but it's sad to not be able to read in Hebrew because there's so much nuance in the language, in the letters of the Hebrew language that you can pick up and understand if you really know sort of the nuances of the language. So it's just a plug for everybody to keep working on your Hebrew if you're working on it, because little secrets can be revealed. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that tonight. Sometimes we learn from seemingly insignificant nuances in the language and the Hebrew text of the Torah. We can learn tremendous insights of deep meaning, because we have to understand when God wrote the Torah, he dictated the Torah to Moshe letter for letter. So God would say, Moshe, write a vav. Moshe would write a vav. Okay, Moshe, write a yud. Moshe would write a yud. Moshe, write an aleph. Moshe would write an aleph. So if there's a letter that's missing, or there's an extra letter, you know that was deliberately put there by God for a reason. And that's why the Talmud will oftentimes go to town on a missing letter in the Torah, or an unnecessary letter in the Torah. So here's an example that I want to give of that. So we know that this person that Abraham has to negotiate with in order to buy the tomb of the patriarchs, what would eventually be the tomb of the patriarchs, his name is Ephron. Okay, and he's haggling with Ephron, and you can see in the Hebrew, I put it big and bold and white. That's how you say Ephron, Ephron, with Ephron. Okay, and you can see the name Ephron is spelled Ayin, Pei, Resh, Vav, Nun. The bet in the beginning is a prefix, means with, Ephron. Okay, so it's spelled with those 5 letters, Ayin, Pei, Resh, Vav, Nun. That's in 23:8. In 23:10, 2 verses later, you see again, Ephron, means and, but Ephron is spelled the same way, Ayin, Fe, Resh, Vav, Nun. That's how his name is consistently spelled throughout the Torah. You see it again in 23:16. But then in 23:16, the second time Ephron's name appears in that verse, all of a sudden, there's a letter missing. Can anyone unmute yourself and spot the missing letter? It's spelled Ayin.
It's above.
It's the Vav. Nice, at least excellent. Ayin, Pei, Resh, Nun. But the Vav is missing. That means when Hashem is dictating the Torah to Moshe, he says, okay, Moshe, write an Ayin. Moshe writes an Ayin. Write a Fei, he writes a Fei. Write a Resh, he writes a Resh. Write a Nun. And Moshe says, oh no, Hashem, I'm sorry. I think you misspelled that. Spell check it. You need a Vav there. Hashem says, no Vav, I know what I'm doing. Skip the Vav. So Moshe skips the Vav. Why? Why does he skip the Vav? So when that kind of thing happens, we usually turn to Rashi. And Rashi points out that the name Ephron is written defectively, so to speak, without the Vav, to indicate that there was something missing in Ephron. Sincerity. Because he promised much, but did not even do the very least. Oh, what's the matter? I'll give you this land. You don't have to pay for it. It's yours. Take it for free. It's yours, Abraham. You're a tzaddik. You're a righteous person. Take it for free. And then what does he end up charging him? A fortune. He rips him off blind. So Ephron loses the Vav from his name. Okay, fine. Beautiful. I want to tell you something. When you learn Rashi, there are 4 steps to learning every Rashi. Every time you see a Rashi, you got to go through 4 steps. 1, what was bothering Rashi? What was it in the verse? What peculiarity in the verse was it that cued Rashi, that tipped him off that something was going on over here? Okay, so that's easy. There was a missing vav. Okay, step 2 in learning Rashi. What does Rashi say as a result of that peculiarity? Okay, so we have the answer to that. He says that Ephron his name is written without the vav because there was something missing in Ephron. He was missing sincerity because he promised a lot and didn't even do a little. Okay, that's the easy part. The 3rd step in approaching a Rashi is to ask yourself, is there anything that I can myself, David Began, ask about that Rashi? Is there anything about that Rashi that doesn't quite make sense or that needs a little further investigation? And in this case, I think there is. Why does taking away the letter Vav indicate that Ephron was anything but sincere? What is it about the missing Vav that indicates Ephron's insincerity? That's the question. And step 4 is the reward for me asking that question, which is an insight, an idea, a concept that we can oftentimes find in the commentaries on Rashi. And I'm going to share with you what that insight is. Okay, the insight is over here. It's very interesting, which is that I know you guys all love gematria. Okay, gematria is the numerology in Torah. The numerology, every letter has a numerology, numerical value. So for example, Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, etc., etc. Okay, so the name Ephron, somebody do the math over here. I'm not very good at math, but the name Ephron without the Vav is spelled Ayin.
400.
Okay, hold on one second, step by step. Ayin is 70. Okay, Fe is 80. What are we up to? 150. Resh is 200. That's 450. And Nun is 50. So what was it? 400. Okay. Why 400? Why is so by removing the Vav, let's go back. By removing the Vav from Ephron's name, his name is now in numerology, his name is now 400. Why? So there are many
400 years.
Huh? What'd you say?
In 400 years, the children will be subjugated, and Esau came with 400 men.
Okay. So what does 400 have to do with anything? So first of all, how much did Ephron end up charging for the field that he said he was going to charge nothing for?
400.
400 shekels. Okay. So by removing the vav from his name, the Torah is broadcasting forevermore. This guy, you know what? From now on, we're just going to call him the 400 dude. The guy that ripped off Abraham and charged him 400 silver coins for a piece of land. Okay, but it goes a little bit deeper than that even, because 400, the gematria of 400 is also spells out the word Ra-ayin. So we know what an ayin tova is. An ayin tova is somebody who's generous, someone who's kind, somebody who has a good eye. So someone who has an ayin ra is the opposite, somebody who's stingy, someone who's jealous, someone who's greedy. It's the exact opposite of an ayin tova, an ayin ra. So we by taking the vav out of Ephron's name, he is known as the 400 dude, the stingy, greedy Ephron. And every other time in Torah, I don't want to go into it now, but every other time in Torah that you see 400, it has something to do with greediness and stinginess. But I'll leave that to you for your homework. Okay, fine. So moving back. So what happens now? Avram buries Sarah and forever establishing this particular spot as the ancestral burial place of the Jewish people. And then we begin chapter 24. Okay, also I just want to point out that we see from the very beginning of our people how important burial is as a concept in Judaism. Burial is a very critical part of the journey that the soul needs to take, as opposed to other forms of dealing with a body after death. If anyone wants to talk about that more, I'm always available to talk about the importance, and so is Elisa, about the importance of Jewish burial. Okay, so now, moving along. So what happens? So Avram goes through these negotiations before that, sorry. So in chapter 24, no, after that, in chapter 24, after the story is over of the burial. So it says, it's very kind of simple, almost a throwaway pasuk, a throwaway verse. It says, Va'avram zakein, Avram was old, Babi Yamim, advanced in years. Now that's a translation. This is another reason why I don't like having to rely on translations, because translations are not always that accurate. If I would read these words carefully, I would translate them as follows. If I wrote my own translation on the Torah, I would translate the verse as follows. Va'avram zakein, Avram was old, Yamin. He came with his days. He came Yamin, with his days. Avram was old and he came with his days. And Hashem blessed Abraham with all things. So what does that peculiar phrase mean? Abraham was old. He came with his days. What does it mean to come with your days? So I want to share with you a beautiful insight. I've shared this, I think, in the past. This comes from the great tzaddik known as the Shalach HaKadosh. He's known as the Shalach HaKadosh, but his name was Yeshayahu ben Avram Horowitz from Prague. He was known by the title of his work, as most rabbis are known. Here's a picture of his tomb. He's buried in the holy city of Tzfat, in the in the ancient cemetery in Tzfat. And the Shalach HaKadosh says something really fascinating. He says, a Jew must perform at least one act of chesed, of kindness, every single day, in order for his day or her day to be considered a day. Okay? And without one act of chesed a day, that day did not exist. Didn't exist. That means every morning, each and every one of us should wake up in the morning and ask ourselves the question. What's the question? The question is, what can I do today to make somebody happy? What can I do to help somebody grow? What can I do to help alleviate someone's pain or sorrow? What one act of chesed can I do today? And if I do that and I follow through, then my day is a day. So when it says that Abraham was Babi Yamim, he came with his days, the commentaries explain what that means was Abraham showed up at the end of his life with a pekala, a bag, so to speak, a container of every single one of his days. He showed up with his days. He had all of his days because every single day, Abraham, who was the pillar of chesed, who was focused on kindness all the time, showed up with his days in the end because every single day counted, because he did an act of chesed, at least one, every single day. Okay? And what did the verse say afterwards? It says, the same verse says that Hashem beirach es Avram ba'kol. And as a result, Hashem blessed Abraham with everything, all things. Now, what does it mean? God blessed Abraham with everything. So Rashi again picks up on that. And what is the gematria of kol, of the word kol? The gematria, the numerical value of the word, bakol, is ben, son. And Rashi explains that God blessed Abraham at that point with a son. Okay, and that was why he was blessed with a son, with Yitzchak. Okay, now what happens next? Avram goes out to find a wife for that Yitzchak. He decides, okay, my son, 37, just passed the test of the Akedah. I got to get this guy married because I'm not going to be around forever. My wife Sarah is no longer alive. My time is coming soon. I got to get him married so we can pass on the mantle of leadership of this movement that we've started. So he goes to his faithful servant Eliezer, and Eliezer, and he tells Eliezer that he wants him to go find a wife for Yitzchak. This is just an interesting side point, but I want to point it out. So Abraham is talking here to Eliezer, and he says, I want to make you swear by Hashem. And he says that the God of heaven and the God of earth, make you swear by Hashem, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not take a wife from my son, from the daughters of the Canaanites, etc., etc. And then Eliezer says, well, what if she doesn't want to come back with me? We'll talk about this more later. And then Avram says here in the white, he says, on no account must you take my son back. Hashem, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house, he'll make sure, he'll protect you. He'll send an angel, you'll find somebody. But what I wanted to point out is something very interesting, that in the course of 4 verses or 3 or 4 verses, God goes from being referred to as the God of heaven and the God of earth just to the God of heaven. What happened over there? So something really fascinating. And Rashi points it out that I'll just explain it to you, that when he said, let's go back. When he said the God of heaven and the God of earth, Abraham is talking about now, right now. I will make you swear by God, by Hashem, who's the God of heaven and the God of earth. Okay? But then he says, the God of heaven who took me from my father's house, way back when, a long, long, long time ago, when I first left my father's house. So Rashi says that originally he was the God of now he is the God of heaven and earth, the God of heaven and the God of earth. Why? Because I have made his name a familiar one in people's mouths. But at the time when he took me from my father's house, at that point he was only the God of heaven and not the God of earth, because nobody acknowledged him and nobody knew him. His name was not known on earth. So what Avram is saying is that in the beginning of my career, so he was just the God of heaven, referring back to when he first left his father's house before he started his movement. God was the God in heaven. But now, after a lifetime of dedicating myself to teaching and bringing godliness into the world, he's not just the God of heaven, he's the God of earth. And in a sense, this really gets at the very core of what the mission of each and every single Jewish person is, which is to make a dwelling place for God on earth, to bring God down to earth, to bring God into our daily lives, and to share with other people, and to teach other people, and to bring that knowledge into the world, and to continue on Abraham's mission of converting God from being just the God in heaven to the God of heaven and earth, where he's known and acknowledged and understood on earth. Okay, so Eliezer sets out to Aram Naharaim. It's a 3-day journey. He sets out there to find a wife for Yitzchak. Miracle takes place. He gets there in 1 day, and he's going to go look for this wife. The problem is he's got a little problem. What's his problem? He can't just randomly go up to people and start interviewing them for the job. Hey, I got this master back in Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan. He's looking for a wife for his son. He's got to somehow figure out who this girl is supposed to be, but it's not so simple. So what does he do? He comes up with a scheme, a plan. What's his plan? He says, God, master of Abraham, grant me good fortune this day and deal graciously with my master Abraham. Here I stand by the spring. So Eliezer is standing by the spring, or a well, as the daughters of the townsmen come out to draw water. Here he goes. Let the maiden to whom I say, please lower your jar that I may drink, and who replies, drink, and I will also give water to your camels to drink. Let her be the one that you have decreed for your servant Isaac. Thereby I shall know that you have dealt graciously with your master. Okay, and the next thing he knows, Rebecca shows up on the scene. So seems like a very strange thing what's going on over here. So first of all, I just want to point out, it would appear that what Abraham is testing for, what Abraham seems to be looking for,
Eliezer,
is one midah, one attribute, one character trait, and that is the character trait of chesed. He's looking for a kind person to marry Isaac. Now, I'm not diminishing the importance of chesed. Chesed is extremely important, but you got to think about what we're talking about over here. We're talking about picking the next matriarch of the Jewish people. the woman who's going to carry on this leadership of this movement that was started with Abraham. She's got to be more than a balabusta. She's got to be more than, knowing how to make a good challah and a good cholent and having guests over. She's got to be a spiritual giant. She's got to be one of the great powerhouses in history. She's got to be someone with incredible emunah, someone who has incredible, deep, powerful faith in Hashem, trust in Hashem. Okay, so why doesn't Eliezer come up with devise a plan, a test for that? Devise a test where you're going to find out who's the biggest balas emunah, who's the one that has the most emunah, the most faith, the most trust in Hashem. That's what you got to be looking for, not just someone who's going to make a good cholent. So I want to share with you something very, very powerful. That is exactly what Eliezer was looking for. He was looking exactly for that. He was looking for somebody, not someone who was excelled in chesed, in kindness. He's looking for somebody who excels in emunah. How so? So I've shared with you before, one of my intellectual mentors, one of the most inspiring writers and teachers that I've come across in many, many years, and that was Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, who was murdered by the Nazis in 1941 in the Slobodka ghetto. He was a disciple, a student of Talmud of Rabbi of the Chavetz Chaim's. Okay, so he has a writing. He has an essay that he calls the treatise on Emunah. And somebody's writing on the screen. That's pretty crazy. How did that happen? Okay, I'm going to stop the share and start it again so that we can get rid of those. Okay, he has a treatise on Emunah, on faith. And he says something really, really incredible over there. He says like this. He says, really, there's no idea, there's no concept, there's no intellectual notion that is more simple and more self-evident than the notion or the idea that there is a creator, an infinite creator of the universe that existed before all existence came into being and that brought it into being. And it's very simple. The classic examples. If I stack 6 coins in a pyramid and put them on my desk and you walk into my office, you know for sure that somebody stacked those coins there. They didn't just fall out of a drawer in that pattern, because something as simple but intricate as a stack of 6 coins in the shape of a pyramid doesn't just happen. Or the famous example of if I show you a Shakespeare poem and I say, see this beautiful sonnet, you're not going to believe it. I spilled a jar of ink and it landed in the form of this poem. You're never going to believe that, because there's no such thing as a poem without an author. There's no such thing as a building without an architect. Things that show design and order don't just come out of nowhere. That's simple. That's self-evident. And the universe is infinitely, infinitely more displaying of order than a poem or a stack of coins. So why do people not believe if it's so obvious and self-evident? So he says very simply, because human beings believe what we want to believe, and what we don't want to believe, we don't believe. And if there's a disincentive, like if we're bribed by our own emotional desire for there not to be an infinite creator of the universe, because by the way, if there's an infinite creator of the universe, that puts certain pressure and responsibility on me that I might not be that interested in. It means that there's an infinite creator who's watching my every move, who's holding me responsible and accountable for every choice and every word and every action. I might not be that excited about such a notion. So what am I going to do? I'm simply not going to buy it. I'm not going to believe it. We spoke about that 2 weeks ago, or last week, I think, when we spoke about cognitive dissonance. So what do? What stands, says Rabbi Chanan Wasserman? What is the one thing that gets in the way of our emunah, of our believing what is otherwise so self-evident and obvious? Me. I get in the way. My own desires, my own self-interest is what gets in the way. Now go back to Eliezer. Eliezer is looking for the next matriarch of the Jewish people, the one to that spiritual powerhouse, the one who's going to have more emunah, the most powerful belief in God that anyone could ever have. He's not just looking for someone that can make some good chalis, okay? There, I said it like a Chicagoan. Are you happy? Chalis. Okay? He's not just looking for someone who can make it. He's looking for someone who's going to have tremendous emunah. So what does he do? He devises a test. He comes up with a test to test her potential for belief in God. How? Well, he can't just go up to her and say, hey, Rivka, do you believe in God? Because, that may work, that may not work. So he has to go a little bit deeper. And he has to think about this. He says to himself, does this person have the quality, the innate quality, the natural quality of chesed? That's how I'm going to know if she has emunah or not. Why? Because what is chesed? Chesed means, in its essence, it means that I am able to put aside my desire and my self-interest for the needs and desire of another person. You understand? If we have our best friends over for Shabbos, that's a fun Shabbos. It's not chesed. Chesed is when I have people over that I don't necessarily want to spend time with. But you know what? They need somewhere to be for Shabbos. They need a meal. They're hungry, or they need company, or whatever it is. So I'll take my desire and I'll put it aside for the needs or desire of somebody else. That's what chesed is. A Baal Chesed, a master of chesed, is somebody who has the unique, uncommon, unusual human ability to take their own desires and interests and set them aside for the needs and desires of somebody else. So that means that if the one thing that gets in the way of a human being believing in God and having emunah is themselves and their inability to set aside their own desires and their own self-interest, well, then somebody who clearly displays having the unique quality of chesed, that means they have the ability to set aside their own self-interest and desires. That is the person that is going to be able to be a tremendous Baal Emunah, believer in God, because the only thing that gets in the way is self-interest. If a person shows that they can set aside their self-interest, there'll be nothing getting in the way of them having the deepest awareness of God's oneness in God's existence. So that is what Eliezer was testing for. The chesed was just an indicator. That wasn't the be-all and end-all. It was an indicator. Someone who would excel in chesed and kindness would be somebody who would be able to excel in emunah. Okay, so what happens? Eliezer comes up with this test. I just want to go back to this test for 1 second. Look exactly what happens over here. He says, what's he looking for? Let the maiden, the girl, to whom I say, quote, please lower your jar that I may drink, and who replies, drink. Here's the jar. Go ahead and drink. And not only that, I will also water your camels. I'll give your camels what to drink. She's the one. Okay? She's the one that I know for sure. So the question is, what is the magic response of drink? And I'll also give your camels to drink. Why is that the clincher? Okay? So very interesting comment over here. The great Torah commentator known as the Beis Halevi. He was Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, and he was the great grandson of Chaim Volozhner, who was the student of the Vilna Gaon. He's also the 9th generation ancestor of Rav Yosef Soloveitchik, who was the Rav of Soloveitchik, who was the we spoke about last week, who was the head of Yeshiva University, who ordained over 2,000 rabbis in America. So this great commentator of Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, the Beis Halevi, points out something very interesting. He says, first of all, when she says that, let's just go back here for a second to the verse. When she says, when I will drink, right? I drink, here, take what to drink. So by doing that, when she gives the water to someone she does not know to drink, and not only that, but she's, it's not like she showed up at the well with a glass or a straw. She's giving him from the jug that she brought to fill up the family vessels, the family jugs, because she didn't have a glass with her. That shows tremendous chesed. She's kind. Okay, she's got good midot. She's got good qualities. She's selfless. But there's a problem. What is she going to do? If she takes that jug of water that this perfect stranger, she doesn't know who he is. He may have coronavirus. He may have germs. He may have some kind of disease. She can't take that jug now that he's drunk from and backwashed in, right? And bring it back to her house and possibly, infect other people in her house. If she did that, that would show a complete lack of intelligence, lack of street smarts. So what does she say? How is Eliezer gonna test her street smarts? So she says, you know what? But on the other hand, by the way, what's she gonna do? If she's not gonna take the water back, she can't dump the water out. That's embarrassing for him. That's insensitive. Like, basically saying, I don't know what kind of disease you have, so I'm just gonna dump this out right here. She can't do that. So she says, okay, you drink. Now I can't take it back to my house. Your camels should also drink. So she doesn't bring it back to her house, but she doesn't dump it out. She gives the camels to drink. And by doing so, basically she shows she's got good character traits. She's kind and selfless. She has good street smarts. She knows not to bring the possibly contaminated water back to her parents' house. And at the same time, she's sensitive to somebody else's feelings and she doesn't dump it out right in front of them. That was the plan. Okay, so good. Eliezer, who is extremely, okay, so Rivka comes, he devises this plan, she passes the test, he goes back to the house and he begins negotiations with her family, which is not so simple because her family basically are pretty evil, wicked people. So he arrives at Rivka's house and he's ready to speak to the family and get permission. They offer him some food. You can picture how this goes, Middle Eastern negotiations. Come, my friend, sit down, have something to eat. Come on, my friend, it's okay, like it is in the market in the Machne Yehuda and the Shuk. And Eliezer says, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to eat. I'm here for one reason alone. Let's talk. So they begin to, he recounts the whole story and he tells the whole story over again, exactly as it happened to Rivka's family. And then something happens. And this is where the rabbis of the Talmud, and Rashi quotes them, pick up on a nuance in the language. Okay, so the story happens twice. Once it happens in real time, where the actual story takes place, and then Eliezer tells the entire story over again in detail. So when it originally happened, it says the servant said, okay, so this goes back to the very beginning. Abraham is sending Eliezer. He's making him take an oath. And Eliezer is the servant. He says, what if, when I get there, the woman that I find, right, does not consent to follow me back to the land of Canaan? Right? What if I get there and I find somebody, but she won't come back? Shall I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Maybe in that case, I should then come back, take your son, and bring him to there. So that's what Eliezer suggests at the time. And Abraham says, no, don't do that. If she won't come, she won't come. That's fine. I don't want you bringing Yitzchak back there, Isaac back there. Okay, fine. Now, Eliezer recalls the story. He recounts the entire story. He tells it over again. And when he's telling it over again, he says, and then I said to my master, what if the woman doesn't want to follow me? Okay, et cetera, et cetera. So now I don't know how good your Hebrew is, but I want you to look at these two words that I highlighted over here. Ulai. The first time he says ulai. Ulai means perhaps. And it's normally spelled like it is here, Aleph, Vav, Lamed, Yud. When he retells the story, however, it's written differently. Ulai, pronounced the same, but it's spelled Aleph, Lamed, Yud. What letter is missing?
Again, the Vav.
Unbelievable. Elisa got it. The Vav again. The Vav is gone. Why? So here is, once again, Rashi. Okay? So what are the 4 steps of Rashi? The first step of Rashi is, what was bothering Rashi? What was bothering Rashi was, what happened to that Vav? Why do these Vavs keep disappearing? Okay? What does Rashi say in response? Fascinating. He says the word ulai, perhaps, that's what it means, perhaps, is written without a Vav, so that it may be read Eli, unto me. When you take the Vav away, So that word, remember in the Torah, there are no vowels. So that word can be read as ulai. It can be read that way. It can also be read as elai, which doesn't mean perhaps, but it means unto me or toward me. Rashi explains, Eliezer had a daughter. Ooh, the plot thickens. Eliezer himself had a daughter, and he was endeavoring to find some reason why Abraham should say that he should give his daughter in marriage to Isaac. Understand, Eliezer had an ulterior motivation over here. He had a daughter, and when he said a lie, but the Torah leaves out the vav, he said ulai, perhaps, and the Torah leaves out the vav, which allows it to be read as Eli, unto me. The Torah is trying to tell us that Eliezer had an ulterior motivation, and he was trying to get Abraham to consider his own Eliezer's daughter for Isaac. Okay, fascinating. Now that's step one in Rashi. What was bothering Rashi? Step two in Rashi. What did Rashi say? Step three. Now we have to ask a question on Rashi. And for that, we're going to turn to the Kutzker Rebbe, Rabbi Nachman Mendel Morgenstern of Kutz, better known as the Kutzker Rebbe, one of the great Hasidic masters in his time in Poland, asks the following question. The Kutzker says, I have a problem with Rashi's theory on this, okay? If Rashi's correct, and what he's trying to tell us is that Eliezer had an ulterior motive, then multiple choice over here. When would you expect the Torah to drop out a vav to tell us about Eliezer's ulterior motive? Option one is in the first time around when the story was live in real time, when Eliezer actually had an ulterior motive, when he was actually motivated by an incentive to get his Abraham to consider Eliezer's own daughter for his wife, when the ulterior motive really existed, then, or later when he's recounting the story after Rivka's already been chosen and there's no longer any ulterior motive because the story's come to an end. If the Torah wants to point out Eliezer's ulterior motive, should it not have done so the first time around when there was an ulterior motive? That's when the vav should have been missing to call out, to red flag Eliezer's ulterior motive, not later after the fact when it's no longer relevant. Okay, great question. And here we get another awesome insight. Okay, so the Kutzker Rebbe says like this. This is really important insight into human psychology. He says, oftentimes when we have to make decisions in life, important decisions in life, we tend to be overly partial towards one result or another in that decision. And the more important the decision is, and the more relevant the decision is, the more likely I am, and the more close to home it is, the more I'm going to have a personal partial leaning towards one result or another in the decision. Okay, we cannot be objective in our own lives when we're making important decisions in our own lives. And the closer the decision affects us, the less able we are to be objective, which is why we always say in Judaism that we should seek out a mentor, seek out a friend and a mentor to help us objectively analyze important life decisions. Okay, I'll give you a simple, silly example. Okay, let's say a person, I'm starving. I haven't had anything to eat, and I'm on vacation or I'm traveling on business, and I have no food, and I get stuck in an airport, and there's nothing, and I'm stuck overnight, and I have no food, and I see there's some food, there's a sandwich or something, and I don't know if it's kosher or not. Okay, and I have to make a decision: is this kosher or not? Can you see how I might end up with a different answer to that question than if I were just like somebody called me and said, Rabbi David, is such and such kosher? Right? You can absolutely see how my very impartial, unbiased desire at that moment, based on me being starving for that particular food to be kosher, may just somehow possibly potentially sway my objectivity and get me to come up with some reason, loophole of some sort why that's actually kosher. Okay, so that's how it works. So anytime we have to make a decision, we are biased in our decision making, especially important decisions. And when we make biased decisions, it can create a lot of damage in our lives. We can make very bad choices that can lead to disastrous ends if we're not objective and we're making decisions based on our partial vested interest in a certain outcome. We can make bad choices about life partners. We can make bad choices about career choices, paths. We can make bad choices about where we want to live if we're not being objective, if we're being driven or bribed, once again, bribed by our desires for X to be the outcome of this choice. Okay? And the only thing worse, the Kotzker Rebbe explains, the only thing worse than this, than making biased decision-making, is what he calls subconscious biased decision-making, meaning we don't even know that we're biased. We're so biased, but we don't even realize that we have a bias. We're totally oblivious.
Did we lose Rabbi David?
Yeah, I think David froze out.
Yeah, he froze and then all of a sudden said I was the host. So
Okay, Julie, let's go. Take it away.
yeah, exactly. I got it. Any questions?
With pearls of wisdom.
He'll come back.
Oh yeah,
You know
he'll be
what?
back.
I have a question while we're waiting. How old
Sure.
was Rivka?
Young.
9 years old, I think.
I've heard so many different answers to that.
I think
In his
it was-
30s.
I've heard
No,
three.
she had to be strong enough to carry all that water. He wasn't
I've
carrying
heard
it.
I've heard she was as young
okay.
as 3.
I'm back. Okay, let me just go back to where I was. We're almost done. Okay. Sorry. So the Kotzker Rebbe says that the only thing worse than making biased decisions is being totally oblivious to it, right? Ali always likes to say that that everybody in the world sees their world through their own biased narrative. That's just how human beings are. The difference between the people that you like to hang out with in life and the people that you don't like to hang out with in life is that the people that you like to hang out with, at least they know, they're conscious of the fact that they're seeing the world through their own lenses and their own narrative. And the people that you can't stand hanging out with are the people that think that their narrative is reality and they don't realize that they're seeing the world through their own narrative. Okay, so the Kotzker Rebbe basically says that when you're completely oblivious to and to your biases, then you're a ticking time bomb. Okay, so go back to Eliezer. Eliezer was an incredibly loyal, committed servant of Abraham. Okay, and Eliezer, if you were to stop Eliezer right in the beginning of that conversation and say to him, Eliezer, you're asking this question, what do I do? Perhaps your daughter won't want to go back. Maybe she won't want to go back. Eliezer, are you motivated by any personal interest right now, perhaps? Are you perhaps biased by the fact that you also have a daughter? And Eliezer would say, no, I didn't think so, right? He's oblivious, he's unaware. So what happens? Only afterwards, when he's retelling the story, and there's no longer a bias, there's no longer a possibility of his daughter marrying Isaac, because Rebecca's already been chosen. So he's detached from his bias, and therefore it's been removed. Only now, in retrospect, looking back, does he realize that he had that bias. He didn't even know he had it in the first place. That's why the Torah takes the Vav out the second time around when the story is being retold, because the story is over now and there's no longer a bias. And only now, this is what the Torah is trying to tell us. Be careful, beware that when you make important decisions in life, you're very likely motivated by an unconscious, unaware bias and personal interest in the investment in one outcome of this decision. That's why the Torah tells us only later, afterwards, in retrospect. Incredible insight from the Kotzker Rebbe. Okay, I want to wrap up in the next 3 or 4 minutes. So first of all, I just want to say that at the end of the Parsha, so Abraham remarries. He remarries Hagar. We find out There's an interesting verse over here that there's a eulogy for Abraham. Okay, the Torah is going to eulogize Abraham. It's going to have some final words to say about him. What are the final words that the Torah has to say about Abraham? Abraham expired, dying at a good, ripe old age, old and content. That's it. That's all the Torah has to say about Abraham, who's just been through 10 tests, who just established himself as the greatest spiritual giant that ever walked the earth, who started the Jewish people, he was old and content. He was old and satisfied. So the truth of the matter is, commentaries point out, that is the single greatest thing that the Torah could possibly say about Abraham. Why? Because human nature is, as King Solomon says, if you have 100, you want 200, right? Ohev kesef lo yispa kesef. A person who loves money, who loves material gain, is never satisfied with material gain. You can never be satisfied with material gain. So if your focus and purpose in life is material acquisition, you can never be saveya. You can never be satisfied. So if the Torah says that Abraham was content, he was saveya, he was satisfied, that's the Torah's way of telling us that Abraham's entire life was about spirituality. Okay, now I said I was going to end with an insight from the great teacher, the great leader, whose soul recently departed, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. I told you I was going to share with you something that he said, and I'll just read it to you. But basically, he just points out that this Parsha is divided into two main parts. One is finding a place to bury Sarah, and one is finding a wife for Isaac. And he says that's because the Torah, 5 times in the Torah, God has promised the land of Israel, and 5 times in the Torah, Avram has promised the land of Israel, and 5 times in the Torah, Avram has promised offspring. But by the time Sarah dies, none of these have really come to be, right? There's no land. Avram has no land yet, and he's got one son, but it doesn't seem that he's going to create this great nation with many offspring. So I'll quote to you from the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and we'll end with this. These are, then, no minor episodes. They tell us a difficult story. Yes, Abraham will have a land. He will have countless children. But these things will not happen soon or suddenly or easily, nor will they occur without human effort. To the contrary, only the most focused willpower will bring them about. The divine promise is not what it first seemed, a statement that God will act. It is in fact a request, an invitation from God to Abraham and his children that they should act. God will help them. The outcome will be what God said it would be, but not without total commitment from Abraham's family against what will sometimes seem to be insuperable obstacles. A land, Israel, and children, Jewish continuity. The astonishing fact is that today, 4,000 years later, they remain the dominant concerns of Jews throughout the world. The safety and security of Israel as the Jewish home and the future of the Jewish people. Avram's hopes and fears are ours. Is there any other people, I wonder, whose concerns today are what they were 4 millennia ago? The identity through time is awe-inspiring. Now as then, the divine promise does not mean that we can leave the future to God. That idea has no place in the imaginative world of the first book of the Torah. To the contrary, the covenant is God's challenge to us, not ours to God. The meaning of the events in Chayei Sarah is that Avram realized that God was depending on him. Faith does not mean passivity. It means the courage to act and never be deterred. The future will happen, but it is we, inspired, empowered, given strength by the promise, who must bring it about. Those are the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs on this week's Parsha. Okay, I'm going to end the recording. I'm going to